Monday, a wonderful Monday here on Crossing Broadcast, your number one favorite not pro wrestling podcast. It's just wrestling. Your number one favorite Philadelphia sports podcast, or it might be your 10th favorite or your 20th favorite. Might not be your favorite at all, but you're here, and many of you are here, and plenty of you are already commenting over on YouTube, and I appreciate it. If you haven't done so already, you can go over to YouTube, look up Crossing Broad, and subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, subscribe, and make sure that you ring that little notification bell so that you always get notified when this show is live. We're also streaming over on the Joy Media YouTube account. You can go over there if you want. You can subscribe over there as well. Going to be doing some new stuff over there in the next few, I'd say in the next week or so. Going to be dropping some stuff over there, but that's also where you can find some of the other shows that I do. It's just wrestling, and some of the Snow The Goalie stuff has made its way over there. So do us a favor, hit those likes, those subscribes, and share the video. We have a lot to get into today. I will say that there's I don't know. I don't know if the malaise has set in yet, right? But as we begin to process, and we started to last week, but as we process the fact that there's only one team, one major team that has major financial backing currently in play for Philadelphia, the Phillies, one that does not have financial backing in any way, the Union. We are now past the Flyers season, we're past the Sixers season, and now everything starts to become the offseason scuttlebutt. And there's a lot of excitement there, and I'm always one who loves to play the hypothetical games with both free agency and trades. So we're going to get into that in a little bit, but I do feel like the malaise isn't hitting yet. I do still feel energetic about the Philadelphia sports landscape, but I do think that we're going to have to get a little bit more creative here. And so if you paid attention on Twitter, or if you look in the description of this episode, you'll see that a few weeks ago, we did the Retro Video Game Monday, and I'm going to do something here that is going to be absolutely cringeworthy, all right? There is going to come a point in this show, and it'll be towards the end, so don't worry, all right? I don't need anybody getting themselves too worked up. But later in the show, I am going to offer some thoughts because I was genuinely shocked and confused about what the hell has been happening on Twitter with this beef between Kendrick Lamar and Drake. And so I said, all right, I'm going to try to learn. We have to remember I once fixed race relations in this country with a tweet about Jalen Hurts and Gene Simmons. And I never became an honorary Q dog, but I did get a little bit of respect from some people on Twitter a few years ago. And so we're going to roll with it a little bit. I'll offer some thoughts on who's currently winning the Drake and Kendrick Lamar beef. Although I think it might be over. I think Drake tried to end it last night. I don't think he did, but we'll get to that later on. Cringy white guy stuff later on in the show. But before we get there, let's have some other cringy white guy stuff today, all right? I know that last week when Kinker was back, we kind of did a postmortem about the Sixers because it was right in the aftermath of them dropping Game 6. And there is so much that I think we left kind of unsaid in that episode. So I do want to do a little bit of I don't want to call it the macro recap, and I don't want to do a full macro analysis of everything, but I want to dive into a few of the things that have been standing out, I would say, over the last few days, at least in terms of potential players that the Sixers are allegedly considering going after in the offseason. Because, look, the way that things ended, it was painful, it was disappointing. I think that you can once again make the case that, hey, in Game 6, at least you had some of the role players show up, but some of the rumors out there are continuing to get even more engagement, and it seems like the Sixers are not hell-bent on trying to go out and get another star who's in his mid-30s, but it really does feel like they might be leaning that direction more than trying to just use the Tobias Harris money on multiple role players who know what they're doing. We talked about this on Thursday, but one of the biggest things that set the Knicks and the Sixers apart is that the Knicks role players knew exactly what was expected of them and they executed their roles. They weren't being asked to do 7 different things. Mitchell Robinson came in. He knew to bang on the glass. That was his job. That was his role. Dante DiVincenzo knew that when he came in, his only purpose is to shoot the rock. They had specific role players to perform specific roles on their team. That's a well-constructed roster. Now, Daryl Morey is supposed to talk to the media at 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock today. And I saw Kevin Kincaid, and Craig, I want you to pull it up because Kinker wrote a thing for the site. And he made this point last week, and it drove me batty. It legitimately took me to a place where, I wasn't ready to light Kinker on fire, but I definitely feel like he's full of shit. And I mean that in a loving, respectful way. But this is how things are at Crossing Broad. Sometimes you agree with the people who write for the site or pontificate on this podcast on Thursdays, and sometimes you find yourself in agreement. But look, Kinker is of the belief that Daryl Morey is only number 3 on the blame list. That Daryl Morey is number 3, and Kinker can't figure out how to elevate him. And I started talking about this last week, and then, Pagan showed up with his glasses, and, he kind of got in his own head a little bit as we were going. But Daryl Morey has far more blame than I think, for whatever reason, Kinker is willing to acknowledge. And it feels like that some of the people who write about the Sixers have also been willing to acknowledge, and I can't put my finger on it. But here you go. So Craig earning that $750,000 salary. On the Sixers ladder of blame, I still have Daryl Morey third and can't move him higher, says Kevin Kincaid. Well, who's 1 and 2? You talk about, does Joel Embiid shrinking at different moments in the postseason and not being available down the stretch, does he get more blame? Does Tyrese Maxey get more blame for not having as locked in of a performance in Game 6? Do you blame Nick Nurse? Do you blame his inclination to just tacking on extra minutes to the star players, which, in fairness, we criticized and killed Glenn Rivers for when he was the coach here. But Kevin keeps going with this idea that, he ranks anywhere from 1st to 4th. Do you go after ownership? Does Josh Harris deserve blame? Josh Harris is not a sensational owner from the perspective of ingratiating himself with the fan base. And we did talk about this last week, but for those of you who might have missed it, who only tune into the Monday show because you just enjoy the dulcet tones of my voice for whatever reason, and I appreciate you, and I love you, and I care about you, and I think you're great. Josh Harris is a good owner from the perspective that he will spend money. Now, he's not a full owner or wasn't a full owner abroad in the EPL. And his team with the Devils isn't a sensational squad by any shadow of a doubt, but he does spend money. And with the Sixers, they have spent money. It's not like you're looking at a situation like some Philly fans do with the Union, where it's like, hey, you're in a top 4 market, a top 4 sports market. You should be pushing out Boku bucks, put it out, get legitimate players. In the case of the Union, go out and get DP level stars. Go out and get guys that are maybe at the end of their career in the EPL or abroad. Bring them in and solidify the starting 11. You don't have that with the Sixers. The Sixers do spend money. Now, they don't spend it well. Tobias Harris wasn't a good way to spend money, but they at least spent the money. They were willing to give a big contract to Al Horford. They weren't willing to give a big contract to Jimmy Butler, which we'll talk about in a little bit, because that's its own mess. And that looks like it might actually rear its ugly head here, which is strange. But Kevin won't assign a lot of blame to Daryl Morey, and I can't tell why. Because if you go back into this past season, one of the problems that we ran into is that Daryl Morey tied his wagon to James Harden. He executed a trade for James Harden when he didn't have to. And then when he did, he presumably had passed up, you go back a little bit, the trade for Harden he made in lieu of what was potentially out there with a Tyrese Halliburton deal, because he knew what James Harden was and he believed in him. So he went out and he acquired James Harden. Didn't have to. Certainly could have waited until the end of the season and gone after him as an unrestricted free agent. Chose not to. Gave up some assets. Gave up some guys that actually did matter. And then in the last offseason, didn't give James Harden the max that Harden very clearly believes he was promised by Daryl Morey and by the Philadelphia 76ers. And in doing so, did kind of build up that undercurrent of like, is Daryl Morey a trustworthy guy or is he not? You started finding all of the people complaining again that Daryl Morey can't be trusted, and James Harden was at the forefront. And so that's a legitimate problem. And that will continue to be a legitimate problem, because whether or not you believe it's going to impact the Sixers' ability to go out and get free agents, that's its own thing. You can make that case. You can argue it. You could say that it's fair. It's not fair. I land on the side of, if a player is offered a ton of money and gets to play in a city like Philadelphia and play with the reigning MVP in Joel Embiid and
get to play with a rising star in Tyrese Maxey. That should be enough to sell a star player, a marquee name, to playing here, okay? But I come back to this because last offseason, when it was very clear that things had gone sour with James Harden, as Connor Allen points out, the system, right? I'm not a system player, I am the system, as he said when he went to the Clippers. Daryl Morey didn't get back sensational value for James Harden. He didn't get back a star caliber player. It's not like you made a swap of James Harden for Paul George. It's not like you made a swap of a James Harden for even a CJ McCollum. You went out and you made a deal to bring back some role players who you eventually turned around and parlayed into Buddy Hield, which I believe Daryl Morey said was the best trade of the trade deadline. It was a move that was, widely reviewed as a good one. I thought it was going to be a hell of a move because Buddy Hield was a legitimate lockdown, knockdown, three-point shooter. I thought that Buddy Hield was going to mesh into this lineup better. I thought Buddy Hield was going to be, maybe not trigger happy, but was certainly not going to hesitate to pull the trigger on a three. And what we saw down the stretch and then in the postseason is that Buddy Hield was very afraid of the moment and could not execute at a high level and ended up becoming unplayable for a couple of games before he rejoined the lineup in Game 6 and put on his best performance in the postseason as a Philadelphia 76er. But I come back to it because they say there was the unforced, unneeded trade for Harden in the first place when you could have gone after him as a free agent. There was the trade away of James Harden that didn't get you back a star. And now you're going into an offseason where, like last Thursday, Kinker said, well, you've cleared all this money. You have a blank slate. You have Tyrese Maxey, you have Joel Embiid, and you have mostly a blank slate. You can go off and you can use the Tobias Harris money and you can clear out some of the role players that would have otherwise been here. And they have a blank slate, except this offseason isn't a good one for free agents, at least not for high caliber free agents. So we come back to the thing that I alluded to from the top of the show. Paul George and Jimmy Butler are the two biggest names out there as free agents. And then you look at, Jimmy Butler's not a free agent. He'd be a trade. Paul George is a free agent. Jimmy Butler, LeBron James, and Kevin Durant are all trade candidates. But what the hell is it going to take to get those guys? And I love when Craig does this. But here comes Craig. Back in 2018, these were all names that were rumored as coming to Philadelphia or Philadelphia teams having legitimate interest. LeBron James. Remember there was the alleged meeting that took place when it turns out LeBron wasn't here. It was just meeting with some of his representation. Paul George, because Paul George has always been a constant rumored candidate to be on the radar of the Sixers. Kawhi Leonard was also one of those guys that was rumored that there was a connection with Brett Brown from his days with Popovich. Maybe that would be something of note. Manny Machado, he ended up getting Bryce Harper, so that was okay. Zach Britton, Eric Carlson, that was pretty funny, though. The Carlson thing wasn't real, but it kind of was real. That's hockey. We don't have to talk about that right now. And then a foreign TP striker, as I said a little bit about the Philadelphia Union. We're not going to talk about that right now. By the way, congrats to Daniel Gazdag for setting the all-time goals record for the Philadelphia Union. Anyway, I digress. Let's get back. Let's get back, Craig. You and your damn tweets. My tweets that you find. The problem that you're going to run into is if you're a Sixers fan and you're trying to get yourself back on the belief bandwagon that, yes, this wasn't great. This wasn't what we needed, right? You didn't need another early playoff exit. Whether you felt like it was fair or not this time because Joel Embiid was hurt and he was at 60% or 70%, depending on the game in the playoffs. If you're trying to get yourself hyped up for next season, which, by the way, Daryl Morey has an obligation to do from the front office perspective and from the organizational standpoint, they have to somehow sell a fan base on giving a shit about the team again. The four names that are out there, three of them have been kind of linked to the Sixers and one not so much. Paul George won't cost you assets. It'll just cost you money. Kevin Durant, I think, is mostly untouchable, and I don't think you have the assets to get him anyway. LeBron James, interesting, because if LeBron does opt out, then he is a free agent. Could LeBron be somebody that you want to go after? There's a lot of baggage there. There are a lot of behind-the-scenes things. There are a lot of potential, does LeBron dictate which role players they go after? We'll talk about that in a second. And then, of course, Jimmy Butler. And I'm going to tell you something that will make me cringe, and I will cringe because I will say this out loud. I almost never have a dream that I remember, but I had a dream last night that Jimmy Butler re-signed with the Sixers, and I remember getting very worked up in my dream because I said, if you weren't willing to pay Jimmy Butler a few years ago, and instead you chose Tobias Harris, Al Horford, if you made that decision a few years ago, due in part to the fact that you didn't think that Jimmy Butler was going to be worth it in years 3, 4, 5 of that contract that you would be giving him, where I believe he's making, I think next year he makes $46 million, and the year after it's $52 million. Craig might have to check me on that one, on like Spotrac or something, but I'm pretty sure Jimmy Butler's making 46 next year, 52 the year after. If you weren't comfortable with the idea of giving Jimmy Butler that contract a few years ago, why the hell would you do it now? Like, why? I get that there's the idea that he has this dog in him. We want winners. We want guys who are hard-nosed in Philadelphia. I get it. But in fairness, it's not a good deal. And Craig, you're going to have to zoom in on that because even with my well-corrected, surgically corrected eyes, yeah, $48 million and then $52 million. Player option for the 25-26 season at $52.4 million. If you weren't comfortable with him getting that contract a few years ago, why would you take on that contract now, knowing damn well his best years of that deal are already gone? And I get it. I don't believe that the Sixers have the vision right now. I think that the desperation is going to kick in. They are going to look at this as Joel Embiid only has 2 years left, 3 years left of being MVP caliber. Then again, his health, we have no idea. But they're going to look at it and say, we have to maximize Joel Embiid's winning window. Who's a player that Joel Embiid loved playing with? Jimmy Butler. Who's a guy who can get this team mentally set the right way? Jimmy Butler. I actually don't even hate the idea of having Butler together with Tyrese Maxey. I will point out very briefly that if there was one good thing to come from the James Harden effect and of James Harden's tenure here with the Sixers, it's that Maxey appeared to have been supported by Harden, and Maxey said publicly that James Harden really kind of got him locked in and focused in on what he could become and what he could grow into. And in a sense, Harden kind of mentored him in a way when he was here. And listen, if that's what it took, and you look at some of the moves that Maxey has kind of perfected and some of those step backs that he really started to execute at a high level in the second half of the season and even in the postseason, if that's the one silver lining to the James Harden tenure in Philadelphia, then it was worth it. But you go back to Jimmy Butler. Like, what is Jimmy Butler now? And a lot of people I saw, they were excited about the idea because, in fairness, a lot of people liked when Jimmy Butler was here, and they liked the player that he was, and they thought that, you know what? When it comes down to it, player by player, he's the perfect guy to have to kick Joel Embiid in the ass, which, for better or worse, it does seem like each and every year we have that talk about Joel kind of moping, Joel not seeming fully engaged. So the idea was, hey, Jimmy Butler gives Joel Embiid a kick in the ass, and maybe Embiid doesn't fall off. Maybe Embiid stays locked in the entire way through. But we have to look at what Jimmy Butler is now, and Jimmy Butler is not the same guy that I think a lot of Sixers fans remember. And the biggest thing that you have to keep in mind is that he has not been able to remain healthy. He has missed 20-ish games per season since that new contract with the Heat. In fact, you go back to the first year that he played with Miami, he played 58 games. Then in 2020, played 52. That was that weird COVID year. 57 the next year, 64 in 2022. And then this past year, 60 games. So he's out of the lineup for 22. Now, you can make the case that if you figure out a way to jockey and to load manage his games, you're going to load manage Joel Embiid. Maybe you think that like the combo together with Tyrese Maxey is something that's even better than when Ben Simmons was here as the three-headed whatever that thing was. If that's the case you want to make, then that's fine. But you have to remember, this guy is not going to be the guy that you wanted him to be. And his best years are likely behind him, and his healthiest years are also likely behind him. If the Sixers go out and get him, and they're going to try to make the case that Jimmy Butler is good for their culture, In the same way that the Miami Heat believed that Jimmy Butler was good for Heat culture, I guess you could make that case. I'm not going to make it. I don't think it's a good call. I really don't. I genuinely think that while you might even pick up some more wins in the regular season, while he might be able to help you get through the first round next year, Jimmy Butler, to me, would have to be the third option. Does Jimmy Butler want to be the third option on a team? Because he has to be. And if it's going to defer to Joel, but he's number 2 behind Joel, that's a problem because Tyrese Maxey's development into a potential star should be the number 1 focus of this team. I said this last week. While everybody's trying to come up with how you maximize Joel Embiid, Craig, why are we going back to 2018 again? On his fit with the Sixers. That was from when they got him, Craig. There's no relevance here, Craigles. You sweet boy. Somebody talk to Craig. Somebody in the comments let Craig know what you're thinking, right? Because he's gone off the reservation today. 2018 tweets. But the thing is, Tyrese Maxey has to be the focus of this roster. Has to be. We know what Joel Embiid needs around him. Joel Embiid needs legitimate shooters. Joel needs legitimate guys that can spread the court so that when a defense collapses on him, because he comes with so much gravity, that the guys that they put along the perimeter are able to hit those shots, and unlike Buddy Hield in the postseason, except for Game 6, are willing to pull the trigger on those threes. We know that that's what Joel Embiid needs. And it also helps to have a guy who can facilitate and who can create his own shot, which they have in Tyrese Maxey. So then it becomes, do you really have to build a roster like that? I don't know. I look at it and I say, how do you maximize Tyrese Maxey? How do you maximize your future star? How do you get the most out of him? And I'm not sure that it's the same thing as what you need for Joel Embiid. Like Tyrese Maxey's going to need guys who can hit threes. That is important. They're going to need another wing who can create his own shot. If you want to have the conversation about Paul George, because it's not going to cost you assets, it's just going to cost you money, I do think that Paul George fits in here well as a number 3 option. I think he's a better player overall than Tobias Harris. His problem, obviously, is the same problem that Tobias Harris has. He can disappear for stretches in the postseason, which is obviously a problem, and you can't have it. If Paul George comes here and he puts up a couple of clunkers in the first round, and you're able to still get by because somehow Daryl Morey will have put together a roster that's cohesive, which he hasn't done in years, then like, what does that look like in the second round? Does Paul George get in his own head? Like, these options aren't great. And I said last week, I love Kevin Durant. I love what Kevin Durant is. I love Kevin Durant, the player. I also think that Kevin Durant's best health days are long behind him. And there have been those murmurs about, as a guy in the locker room, perhaps not the most conducive to a young locker room because maybe he butts heads with coaches a little bit. And that could be a concern. And you don't want that to infect Tyrese Maxey. And you certainly don't want that to kind of get the mopey Joel moping more, right? So that might not be the best fit. And so I'll put out an idea that I think is crazy, but I think is actually an okay one. For the first time, I am willing to say the Philadelphia 76ers should go after LeBron James. They're not going to get him. They won't. I think he's going to end up looking at the Knicks. I really do. And I think that for him, the Knicks are his perfect team. I think that the Knicks have the roster. I think they have the role players with the defined roles. I think LeBron can slide into where Julius Randle is, and then you trade out Julius Randle's money. And there you go. That's the perfect fit. And he gets to come back to the Eastern Conference where the only real juggernaut is the Boston Celtics. And I think that LeBron with a good Knicks team around him can beat the Bucks, and I think that they'd probably beat the Sixers. But hear me out. If my biggest concern is that Joel Embiid needs legitimate role players around him, but Daryl Morey is incapable of building that roster, then why not lean into having LeBron James play here? LeBron is the guy who's thought of as this behind-the-scenes GM, who's dictating terms on which role players join the team. He had KCP in the past take a much lower than market value contract specifically so that he could go out and get this guy on his team. And I think that there is a case to be made that perhaps LeBron in a title chase move would perhaps be good at getting some of those free agent role players to take less money to come to Philadelphia. I think that that's the play. If I'm going to take on a 30-plus-year-old guy, I'd rather it be LeBron James. Because the other big part of this, too, is Jimmy Butler apparently wants an extension beyond the 2 years that he has left, which is insane. Okay, it's bad enough that it's going to be $48 million and then a player option for $52 that he will almost assuredly take. You can't extend that guy. There's no way. So let it be LeBron. Play it out. LeBron likes the one-and-one deals. Let him sign a one-year contract with a one-year player option. The worst thing that happens is he gets hurt, or it doesn't work culture-wise. It doesn't work with ownership. It doesn't work with the front office, and he bails after a year. It's still better than being locked into a 5-year contract with Paul George, or a 5-year contract, including an extension with like a Jimmy Butler, or a 5-year contract even with a Kevin Durant. I think that LeBron's your best option. And I've always been very anti having LeBron on this team because of all the behind-the-scenes issues with trying to dictate terms on players and maybe pushing around a front office and definitely pushing around coaches and dictating who's here and who's there. But if I had to take my pick, it's LeBron James. And I would beg someone to make the case for why it's not the right call. By the way, I have seen, and there are people saying in the comments, Markelle Fultz is going to be a free agent. What about Markelle Fultz? I will credit Markelle Fultz with one thing. When he left Philadelphia and multiple media members tried to get him to speak out against the Philly fans, he did kind of go to bat for the Philly fans, that they supported him and that it was really hard to get himself out of his head, and that he tried to work his way through it, but he thought that the Philly fans, for the most part, were really supportive. So there you go. But we're going to put a bow on this. This all started with me saying that I think Kinker's full of shit, or at least I can't understand where Kinker's coming from. I lay all this out for you. And the big thing that Kinker said was, you're clearing the books. That by not going out and getting another aging star like James Harden, you cleared the books and you set yourself up for the offseason. I've now presented you every option they have. That's a big name that could potentially be available to you. Are you motivated by any of it? If the Sixers went out and signed Paul George in a month, would you be more motivated as a Sixers fan to spend your money on the Philadelphia 76ers in the regular season and then the postseason? If they went out and they executed a trade for Kevin Durant, would you be more willing to spend money on this team in the regular season and the postseason? If they went out and got LeBron James, would you be more willing to spend money on the regular season and the playoffs? I don't see anybody in the comments saying yes. Joe Papel says no. Ford says nope. It's great that you can clear the books, but this is the wrong offseason for it. You missed a chance. You missed a window. I'm not so sure that it's a great thing. The only, we came into the season, and Kincaid and Pagan said this on the last show. They talked about this year coming into it as, hey, is this a gap year? Do you just admit defeat and say that this is the gap year? And I will just come back to this, and I have a very simple thing. If you can't get a star caliber player in here, which you don't have the assets to, you just genuinely don't. If you can't get that guy here, and if you decide that Paul George isn't the way to go, or he decides to go somewhere else, and you can't get LeBron, or LeBron decides to go somewhere else, and all you're left with is Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, and a couple of guys who are still under contract, do you look at next year and look at next year as another gap year? Like, do you look at this upcoming offseason and say, we're happy to use all that cap space to get the best role players we can and try to build a cohesive roster like the Knicks have, and put Tyrese Maxey as the number one option along with Joel Embiid, and roll into next season saying we're going to try to actually build a deeper roster, one that we don't require a guy like Tobias Harris to show up, one where we don't have to necessarily lean on a scrap heap find like Kyle Lowry, which, no offense, he had some good games, but like he was what he was. Buyout market guy. We can't rely on the reanimated corpse of Nico Batum, who, by the way, had some very good games. Like Nico Batum. Seems like a good guy. But do you go into next year and say, hey, it's better to just spend that money evenly, short-term contracts with role players, and try to run it back that way? I don't know. That's where I would lean. But that's one more year of Joel Embiid's potential prime that you will have essentially, in a sense, flushed away, or a season where you're going to go in and say, hey, we haven't put our best foot forward in terms of getting a third star player in here to get this team over the hump. If you look across the league, I get that there has been a little bit of a shift in terms of which teams succeed, big three versus more cohesive roster. And you can make the case that what Denver has in Jokic, who is a total unicorn, and Jamal Murray, and a bunch of those guys, they don't necessarily have a third stud star that you would say is definitely part of a big three. If you look at the Knicks, you would say it's mostly role players, and Jalen Brunson is a total killer. If you look at the Celtics, it's Tatum, whatever you think Jaylen Brown is, which I think he is largely overrated in a sense, but is a very good player. But they don't have a third head to that trio. And you saw what happened with the Bucks. They went all in on the idea of having Giannis with Dame, and those guys couldn't stay healthy. They were mostly unavailable for their playoff series, and now they're out and the Pacers are in. You look at the Pacers. Do the Pacers have a big three? No. Look at Phoenix. Phoenix went all in on a big three. It didn't work. The Mavs have two legitimate stars in Luka and Kyrie Irving. Maybe the league is getting away from big threes. Maybe the league is kind of showing you where things are going, and you shouldn't go after a big money guy that's 34. So I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do to get this fan base excited. Daryl Morey talks in a half hour. Let me know in the comments what you want to see him say. And if you're listening back after the fact in the podcast feed, by all means, tweet at me at JoyOnBroad and let me know if Daryl Morey has done anything to get your excitement back, or if he's done anything to make you think that he's going to get creative in the offseason. Again, their problem is they don't have the assets. They just don't. Unless you're going to trade a bunch of future first-round picks to try to get a guy. And I don't even know who's available. Genuinely, truly, I don't know. I think that they've kind of screwed this situation up. And I don't think they have an easy out. So we'll see. I just hope they don't double down or triple down on the idea of going after a mid-30s guy and hoping that it works. Because I think that there's a higher than zero chance that it blows up in their face. But we'll see. I feel like that's probably a good place to end the Sixers conversation. Even though I love the Sixers and I want the Sixers to succeed, I feel like we have to kind of put a bow on it unless Daryl Morey says something really fucking dumb at 1 o'clock, in which case next week we'll have this conversation. I won't be on the show on Thursday. I'll be traveling for work. But that's it for Sixers for today. Let's talk about some of the other teams in the city. I didn't see anything that was entirely exciting about the Eagles. I will note that they had the clip, and this is where the Eagles social media team deserves beaucoup bucks for good content. But they had the home run derby that they tried to do, the Eagles home run derby, and Jordan Mailata hit a home run. That's fantastic. Great job. Love Jordan Mailata. Huge guy. That was about the only thing that I saw about the Eagles that was of interest. Not going to sit here where we talked about this with the draft picks, exciting. The one cool clip that came out last week that I don't think we talked about on Thursday was the behind the scenes in the war room of the Eagles thinking that they were about to get jumped in the draft for Cooper DeJean, and instead they ended up getting him, and they showed how excited they were. Lurie and Howie Roseman were very much in the same mindset that once they got jumped in the draft order, that was it. It was over. The dream died. I think Lurie even said, well, that's it. It's over. And then I think it was the Rams who traded up, and they picked a different guy. And then you saw Howie go into immediate, not freak out mode, but he goes into immediate back into fully locked in GM mode, executes a trade, goes and gets Cooper. So that's very cool. That was a neat little thing. We'll talk about the Phillies here for a minute before we get to the awkward white guy conversation about Drake and Kendrick Lamar, which we'll get to in a little bit because there are some thoughts. And I have not had Craig do research. I thought about having Craig go back and listen to every diss track that's come out over the last week, but we didn't go there, and I told him I didn't want him to do it because if I'm awkward enough, some people think that I'm racially ambiguous enough. I look very white in this video. My color is very flushed out here, but I will tell you that if I'm awkward white guy, Craig with his 3-inch inseam shorts that he wears to go run like ultra marathons is even more awkward white. So I didn't have him go try to figure out what's going on with Kendrick, Lamar, and Drake, but we'll get there in a minute. But the Phillies are on fire. And in a good way. In a good way. The Phillies are on an absolute tear, and they've got Zach Wheeler going for them tonight in a game that could potentially mark their 10th consecutive win at home at Citizens Bank Park. And I have to tell you, like, I'm back in on the Phillies. I said this last week that, like, hey, if you keep it up, I'm going to be back in on the Phillies to a point. I love good baseball. I love watching a good baseball team. But of all of the sports that I will watch a bad team through, baseball is by far on the bottom of my list, right? I will watch a bad football team. I will watch a bad basketball team, as I did for many years with the Process Sixers. I will even watch a bad hockey team. In fact, I've covered multiple bad hockey teams in recent years with the Flyers. I will watch bad soccer. I will. Bad baseball is especially painful because soccer versus baseball, we at least know a soccer game is 90 minutes, plus maybe a little bit of extra time, right? A little bit of stoppage time. But bad baseball, at least prior to the pitch clock, when you're sitting through and you're kind of going through the 3 hours of just dog shit baseball, not exciting to me. This team, however, is. The negative, obviously, one big negative to come out in the past week is that Trey Turner's out with a hamstring injury that could cost him 6 weeks. And obviously for a guy that relies on speed the way that Trey Turner does, it's one of the worst injuries that he could maybe suffer, maybe. And I see Rico over here on YouTube says bad baseball is still better than bad football. But Rico admits to not being a big football fan. Trey Turner suffering this injury sucks. But the good news for the Phillies is that so many of the other bats have been able to remain hot that if there's a lineup that should be able to weather the storm for the next 6 weeks or however long it takes for him to get back, it should be this Phillies team. They are currently on pace. And it's funny when you look at recent history and then obviously the full history of the Philadelphia Phillies. They are on track to have a better season than in 2011 when they set the franchise record with 102 wins. I know that we go into seasons, and last year especially, it was the idea hey, we're going to try to get off to a hotter start. We need to have a better start, and then they kind of fell on their face early again, and then they did what they do. Schwarby heats up in June. The bats start to heat up later into the season. As the weather gets warmer, so too do the Phillies bats. But you look at it, and this season, the way that it started, obviously has to give you a lot of hope and a lot of optimism. And again, you look at the historical trends, they are on pace to be better than that 2011 team. And so if they're able to keep this up, and especially knowing that the Braves suffered a really significant injury in their starting rotation, you have to think that they're going to be in position to potentially be in the race for the NL East crown the entire season. They should be. Again, health is a big part of it. And I did say this last week, and I think the week before as well. There is a concern on my end that the pitching has been so sensational. The pitching has played so far over its own head that I do worry about when the law of averages plays out and pitching will have to come back down to earth at some point. I cannot fathom a scenario in which Ranger Suarez is a Cy Young candidate at the trade deadline, or that we get into August and we're still talking about Ranger Suarez being a top 3 Cy Young candidate. I can't envision it. I can't imagine it. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I am. What a hell of a story that would be if Ranger Suarez continues to have a 1.3 ERA through the entirety of the season. It would be incredible. Even if he comes back down to earth and he's at a 2.5 or a 2.6 or something, and he's still in contention to be a Cy Young mention. To be in a scenario where you say hey, Zach Wheeler is definitely your ace. Aaron Nola has ace stuff depending on the day. And Ranger Suarez now could potentially develop into being another ace that you can go into you can go into a postseason and have legitimately 3 ace level stuff pitchers. That would be incredible. I still come back to the fact that the Phillies went after Yamamoto in the offseason. They made him a massive money offer. They thought that he fit the timeline and also that he could be a really good long-term investment. But I think that they are also cognizant of the fact that look, they needed another top-end starter. Suarez, for better or worse, and I guess you could offer for better, at least in the short term, has kind of proven himself to be that third guy. I still would like to see them active leading up to the trade deadline. I know it's months away, but I would much rather see them go out and fortify the top of the rotation than try to find a guy who's a middle of the rotation guy. If there is an arm out there available to the Phillies getting closer to the trade deadline who could be a number one, number two, and is on like the last year of a deal, and admittedly, I haven't looked at the upcoming free agent class, that's the guy to go after. This roster, this lineup, should be able to do what it's doing, even if it's at a somewhat lesser degree of what they've been doing in recent weeks. If this lineup continues to hit and produce in the way that you expected it to going into the season, then you have to focus on the pitching staff. Obviously, you never want to shy away from going after a legitimate bullpen arm, back of the bullpen arm that you could use in critical situations in the postseason. But I still look at it and I say, I love what Ranger Suarez has given them. I love the fact that he's pitching above his head. I love the fact that, like Aaron Nola, despite the fact that I think sometimes up here can throw himself off, and instead of having the ace quality stuff consistently throughout an entire game, sometimes he loses focus or whatever it is that leads to the Nola inning. The fact that he's pitched as well as he has, the fact that I'm a big believer in Zach Wheeler, the fact that he has continued to pitch at an ace level, I would still like to see them go after a top of the rotation guy leading up to the deadline. Will they? Won't they? I don't know. The big concern, obviously, is you haven't really gotten to see the bullpen in meaningful moments so far this season because the rotation has been so good. And I know that from month to month, from week to week, hell, from day to day, a bullpen can show you one good thing. A bullpen can show you another bad thing. They can be ultimately Jekyll and Hyde. If they're not put in positions where they have to have critical innings and critical situations, you don't actually know what you have. And in fairness, a lot of times, sometimes you don't learn about a guy until September. You don't actually get to learn if a guy has it in him to be a 7th, 8th, or 9th inning guy that you can rely on in all situations, or if it's just a matchup, a situational matchup. I'm always an advocate for go out and get one more quality bullpen arm, preferably one with track record, who can show that they've done it in big moments in the past. We're still a while away from it, and hopefully the guys in the back end of the bullpen will be able to get some reps here. They'll be able to get into some of these games. Rob Thompson, a.k.a. Lyndon B. Johnson, think about it. Has anybody ever seen Lyndon B. Johnson and Rob Thompson in the same room? Let that one sink in. Rob Thompson's got a hell of a tight wire that he's going to have to walk over the next few months. He's going to have to get everybody reps. He's going to have to get everybody in. By the way, I mentioned, I think it was last week, I was complaining openly about Taijuan Walker coming into the rotation and what that was going to do to Spencer Turnbull. Still love Spencer Turnbull. He got me a start, I think, that week and helped me win my weekly matchup in fantasy baseball. So I'm still a big Spencer Turnbull guy. Craig is too. He has no idea what I'm talking about. He thinks Spencer Turnbull is like a bare-knuckle fighter. Right, Craig? Like a bare-knuckle brawler. Guy with a nice mustache that rolls up on the ends. Anyway, I think that there's a lot here that we can get excited about with the Phillies. I mentioned about the Phillies relievers, about the bullpen. If Rob Thompson's able to keep them rotating through, and they're able to keep up what they've done over like the last 5 games where the ERA is under 1.5, sensational stuff. If they're able to still go out and put together lines where over the last 5 games, they've got 21 strikeouts and 7 walks, you can keep up a K to walk ratio like that, you're going to win a lot of games. In fairness, this is what a winning team has to do. So there we go. That's positivity about the Phillies. I'm looking forward to seeing how this is going to play out over the next week. And like I said, I won't be here Thursday, but I'll be here next Monday. We'll see if the Trey Turner absence is still something they're able to continue to make up for. I think they will. I imagine that they will. I'm excited about the Phillies. I've already taken the family to one game. I have a feeling this summer is going to be a big Phillies summer in the Joy household. I've got Ford asking what my nationality is because I said that I'm racially ambiguous to some people, except for like right now where I'm very washed out. Asks if I'm a Paisan, if I'm a mix. I don't know. Mix feels a little bit taboo to say there, Ford. Italian and Slovakian, allegedly. That's what they say on the Ancestry DNA thing. Italian and Slovakian. There's like something else too. Craig, have you done the Ancestry.com thing? Did you? Can I bring you on to ask you about your nationality, Craig? I'm going to. We're going to bring Craig on. Craig, there you are.
Yeah.
Hello, Craig.
This view.
There we go. You've done the Ancestry thing?
Yeah.
Have you monitored it? Like, have you monitored it? Oh, so 23andMe is a little bit different, though. Have you monitored it from the time that you got it done the first time to where it's at now? Because on Ancestry, it constantly changes your percentages. Where are you at?
It had me as French for a while, even though like we're very much an Italian family. And over time, it's migrated more to being predominantly Italian and like 0.02% French.
Wow. So it's a big swing.
Yeah.
Huh. I was listening to Freakonomics Radio last week, and they were talking about 23andMe. Apparently, like, I think they were at like a $6 billion market cap, and now it's like down to virtually like break even.
Yeah,
like
they've reach.
Yeah, they've had like a massive fall from grace, but they're like the thought is that maybe their owner's going to try to like take it private, get it out of the market, and rebuild it. But my Ancestry thing has kind of changed all over, and I think at some point we picked up like North African or something. Like we picked up like 2% North African and then like 3% Greek. And all I'm thinking is Italy, Greece, North Africa. They're all there at the Mediterranean. It's all the same. What did Joel Embiid once say? We're all from Africa, right? So I guess that's it, Craig. So maybe your French will turn into French African or something, and you'll come back on in a few weeks and we'll monitor. We should actually pull the history. Like if you have the emails of all of the breakdowns that you've gotten in an email about your ethnicity, we'll put them up on a graph that we can track. What is Craig this week? No? Okay.
I don't know about that one.
Give it up for Craig. Give it up for Craig. $780,000. That's what that pays for. The beautiful dulcet tones of Craig. We now have people dropping in the comments their ethnic breakdown. Rico is all over the place. Spanish, French, German, African, Puerto Rican, and Native American. How about it? I see a comment here from Nat Marlowe that we probably shouldn't pull up, but it is pretty funny. If you're on YouTube, this is why we always say you want to be on YouTube. That's where most of the comments are. Nat Marlowe has a fantastic one, but we'll just leave it in the comments. It's a little Easter egg, although we're noting it, so it's really not an Easter egg. But if you're on Facebook or you're on Twitter and you're like, what the hell is he talking about? Go over to YouTube. Remember, subscribe to the channel, like the video, ring the bell so you get notified whenever the show goes live. There's something there. Something there. All right, now let's finish the show with something that's not sports related, but is I actually, you know what? Hold on. Before we get there, there was one other thing. Craig, can you find the clip that you hate? The Tom Brady roast was last night. There were two things that were breaking Twitter last night. One was that Drake dropped a diss track on Kendrick Lamar. And at the same time, the roast of Tom Brady was going on. And I have to say, comedy feels like it might be coming back. I don't know for sure, but it certainly felt like last night comedy was coming back. And Netflix has gone all in on the idea of pushing their comedy wing and also trying to build up their ability to have live programming, which is obviously going to be big, as this July Mike Tyson and Jake Paul in an actually sanctioned bout are going to go head-to-head live on Netflix. But at the roast of Tom Brady had some interesting things to say about Eagles fans, which I'm just very perplexed on, especially for a guy who played up in the greater Boston area. Craig, let's go to the clip of Tom Brady talking about Eagles fans. Craigles.
Assholes.
There it is. Oh.
But Kevin Hart is from there, so I get it. Yeah, fuck you, Kevin. In Philly, they have to grease up the light poles so people don't climb them after games. You know how they grease up those poles? They rub someone from Philadelphia on them.
Sad.
Philly fans are
Sad.
just racist assholes.
So there you go. That was the start. So Tom Brady called Philly fans racist assholes, which again is kind of fitting because he played in the greater Boston area, and we all know what Boston teams and Boston fans have always been widely accused of. So that's just interesting. The grease pole line is fine. Wasn't his best. I will say, on the night, the person who I think had the funniest set, now I have not watched the whole thing. I've watched the full sets of a bunch of different comedians. I haven't gone back to watch every athlete do their part yet. Like Drew Bledsoe had a few good one-liners I saw on Twitter, but I haven't watched his full set. The best one, by far best full set, was Nikki Glaser. It was incredible. There were so many zingers that she had in her set that a couple of them were definitely on that line. A couple of them might have gone over the line, but it's a roast, and that's the point of a roast. I would encourage you that if you haven't done so, if you have Netflix, go pull up the actual roast and find the Nikki Glaser segment. What was the one guy's name? I had it down here. Was it Churchill? Was it Churchill? He was funny. Julian Edelman had a line that I couldn't fathom. It was Hinchcliffe. Hinchcliffe was the guy. Hinchcliffe had a really good set, which he finished up with Kim Kardashian, who then apparently tried some jokes of her own and got booed, which was also awkward. But Julian Edelman had an Aaron Hernandez joke, and it was something. Craig, what did you pull up? What clip did you think was funny that you pulled up? Oh my God. I don't know. I don't think we should. I think there are a couple of Tony Hinchcliffe jokes in here that we might want to avoid. Yeah. But I will tell you that if you go watch them, they're great. But I don't know. I have a feeling Kinker would want to nuke this entire episode if we played some of the Tony Hinchcliffe jokes. But they were very good. And there is that compilation there where they cut out all the spaces in between. It's like 2 minutes compacted. But Nikki Glaser, I think, still stole the show. Edelman had by far the biggest holy shit joke of the night. What? You just brought up the same clip, Craig. What are you doing? Oh, did Kinker do it? All right, well, if Kinker brought it up, then maybe we... Oh, Pagan did it. Nope, we can't trust Pagan. You can't trust Pagan. You can't. Pagan's decisions, Kinker will still nuke the episode. We can't have it. Can't do it. But I will tell you, it's fantastic. It was great stuff. It was good stuff. Go watch it. All right, last thing. If you're like me and you're an awkward white human being and you don't keep up with rap and you were wondering what the hell is happening with Drake and Kendrick Lamar and should I be invested and should I care, I am here to tell you right now, you should. Because what just happened, like what's happened over the last few weeks, but especially what's happened in the last week or so between Kendrick Lamar and Drake is some of the best battle rapping. It's some of the best head-to-head stuff that I think, well, the people who actually do cover this stuff and the people who actually do know what they're talking about, they've all kind of said this is the biggest one. It was probably the biggest one of this generation, and it might be the biggest one ever, and it might be the biggest one that we'll ever see. But I would encourage people. There was a tweet that I put out. There was a guy on TikTok who kind of explained some of the backstory of all of the people who have a problem with Drake, which I didn't realize was a thing, but apparently it is. And then I will tell you that Drake put out what I think he considers to be the end of it all last night. And I'm not so sure that it is the end. He tried. And he claims that one of the diss tracks that Kendrick Lamar put out where he brought up this alleged 11-year-old daughter that Drake has but doesn't acknowledge or whatever, that Drake claims that he planted that information. Kendrick Lamar had previously said that you have a mole in your camp who is working for me or could be working for me. And then Drake said that he planted this information and that Kendrick Lamar's latest diss track was actually based on a whole fabricated thing that he set up, but it took 2 or 3 days. And so you have people who were saying Drake took too long, and if he really did plant the seed and he really did plant the information, there should have been a video from a few days prior that would have shown how they were planting the information and passing it along to Kendrick Lamar. But then Kendrick Lamar had, I'm going to back up. The stuff that I like the most, the rap that I liked in college was, come back to that in a second, Greg, was old school Kanye. I loved old school Kanye. I loved College Dropout Kanye. And I thought he was incredible at the time. And I think everybody did. But I was never a big rap fan. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm a rap fan now. I'm really not. But I enjoy a good petty beef. All right, if 2 country stars started going head to head, I'm all in on that shit. Two rappers want to go at it. I'm all in on it. So now, Craig, you can pull that thing up. I found a guy who has done an incredible job on YouTube of breaking down every track that these guys have dropped on each other. And it's Screwface Gene, I think is, unless he's Screwface John, like French Jean, but he doesn't sound French. So I'm going to say he's Screwface Gene. His channel is incredible. And if you're like me and you're an awkward white guy who's trying to figure out what the hell is going on, this is the guy to go to. Because his channel has broken down each and every nuance of every single bar in any of these songs. And it's been fantastic. And my wife looked at me last night and she's like, what are you listening to? I'm like, found this channel and this guy's explaining it. So now I feel like I have a better idea. I had the TikTok that I tweeted out the other day that explained like why so many people hate Drake. But I found this guy and I was like, this guy has now explained all of the nuance to every single song that's come out so far. And I will side with Nat Marlowe on YouTube, who said, the only reason I'm saying Kendrick is winning because his raps keep showing up in the feed. This is the last thing you need to know. And I'm hoping that Kendrick Lamar is going to have another diss track dropping today. I hope he does. I really do. I'm now looking forward to it. Again, was not a big Kendrick Lamar fan before this. Will probably not go out of my way to go listen to any prior stuff from Kendrick Lamar or from Drake. But just on the surface, Kendrick Lamar was ready with another track after Drake dropped a track, like almost back to back. One hit from Drake, and then immediately Kendrick Lamar had another one in the ready. Like he had another one in the holster. And there is a rumor that Kendrick Lamar might have as many as 10 different tracks ready to fire at Drake. There's a line, I think, in like the second diss track where he said 5 + 5. He said like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 + 5. And somebody thought that was him kind of hinting that there might be 10 total tracks that he's got ready to go after Drake with. But anyway, I listened to the Drake track last night and I was like iffy on it. Then I went and I watched this guy's analysis of the song. And here's the problem. So apparently Drake is saying, we planted this information. We fed you fake information. You put it together an entire song, an entire diss track about fake information. You didn't check it. You got trigger happy. You just ran with it. You put out a song and it's all bullshit. Okay. If that is true, it comes, I think, 3 days after Kendrick Lamar dropped the track that referenced the alleged fake information. It took him 2 or 3 days to put this one out. You would think that he would have been ready with his own rebuttal if it were true that this was planted information, but it took a couple of days. I would think if I planted fake information on a Crossing Broad person, right? Like if I were going to try to sell people on the idea that Kyle Pagan has 3 bastard children, and I passed that information along to Kincaid, and we were going to turn it into a bit on the podcast, I would make sure that I had my ducks in a row and I was ready that if somebody put out fake information, that if Kinker tried to put out the thing about Pagan, that like I'd have everything ready to go. As soon as Kincaid puts out his thing on the podcast, I'd be ready to go after him. But Drake wasn't. So it makes me think like maybe it's not true. Like maybe he planted some information. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. What I'm going to say is this. This, and Rico's right. This is like my new favorite reality TV show. If you don't care about rap, but you recognize a good beef when you see it, this is worth throwing like an hour or two of your life to go to that guy's YouTube channel and to understanding what happened. Because I still don't get all of it, but I get enough of it that I feel like Kendrick is winning. And the other thing, so Kendrick Lamar is this West Coast guy. And the thought was that Drake was going to be able to kind of take it back and get like the East Coast to kind of go in, even though he's Canadian, that he was going to get like the East Coast people. They were going to like kind of reject it. But then they were showing that over the weekend in a New York club or multiple New York clubs, they had Kendrick Lamar's tracks going in the club. That's not ideal. That's not ideal for Drake. All right, I'm done. This is the most awkward white guy segment we could have ever done to finish a show. I will just say this is the last thing. I'm here for the beef. And if there's another good beef out there, I'm here for it. I did see that the Maestro has Well, he might have some beef. He put out a tweet earlier beefing with PHLY with a T-shirt that came out. I think he said 8 hours before the Sixers got eliminated. Does the Maestro have beef with PHLY? I don't know, but if he does, I'll cover it on the show. Because that's what we do here at Crossing Broad. We like to monitor the beefs. We like to monitor what's happening, and I will always be here for it. Rico says beef. It's what's for dinner. It might be. Today's my wife's birthday, so on Snow The Goalie, we call her fourth host Nancy, but happy birthday to her, to you. She'll listen, so happy birthday. Anyway, time to go. Daryl Morey is going to be talking here in the next couple of minutes. Let me know what you think about Daryl Morey's comments about the end of the Sixers season and what his vision is going forward. I'm on Twitter at JoyOnBroad. Make sure that you follow the Crossing Broad channel on YouTube. You can go follow the Joy Media account. I think it's at Joy Media LLC. You can go follow that on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at JoyOnBroad. Follow Crossing Broadcast. Subscribe in your favorite podcast feed, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, wherever you get your podcasts. Do us a favor. Like this video, share the video, subscribe. Ring the little bell so you're notified whenever we have a show, Crossing Broadcast on a Monday or Thursday. Whenever Big Bet Bob and Anthony do a Crossed Up, and I've been told Crossed Up might drop on Tuesday. Keep an eye out, an ear out. And when Pagan drops his Man on the Street videos, they're there as well. Over on the Crossing Broad channel, subscribe on YouTube. For Craig, who's making $850,000 after his great performance today talking about 23andMe. For Kincaid, who will be back in the lead chair on Thursday. I'm Russ. That was Siri talking on my watch for whatever reason. Thanks for listening to, maybe even watching, Crossing Broadcast. We will talk to all of you. Kevin will talk to you Thursday. I'll talk to you next Monday here on Crossing Broadcast. Have a